The morning Earth changed forever started like any other. Birds sang their usual songs, people went about their daily routines, and the sun rose quietly over the horizon. Then, at exactly 9 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, every screen on the planet went dark. When they came back to life 3 seconds later, the message that appeared made the world stop breathing. Greetings, people of Earth. We are the Galactic Council. In the control room of the Global Space Command Center, Director Tom Wilson watched with wide eyes as the alien figure appeared on the main screen. The being looked almost human, but not quite. Its skin had a slight blue tinge, and its eyes seemed to reflect light like a cat's. Your species has reached a crucial point in its development. The alien continued, its voice deep and clear. You have mastered basic space travel, developed quantum computing, and shown signs of achieving faster-than-light travel within the next decade. It is time for you to prove your worth to join the galactic community. The room filled with whispers and gasps. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now they had their answer, but it came with a challenge they never expected. The alien's next words made everyone's blood run cold. We have studied your species for the past 100 years. Your potential is interesting, but potentially dangerous. Therefore, we offer you a choice. Prove your worth in combat or face isolation for the next century. Director Wilson's hands gripped the edge of his desk. A century of isolation would cripple human development. They had to accept the challenge, whatever it was. The alien figure was replaced by another. This one stood tall and proud, covered in what looked like living metal armor. I am Admiral Stone, undefeated champion of the Galactic Council. I have faced 1,000 challengers from 500 worlds. None have survived more than 10 minutes in combat with me. The Admiral's voice carried no emotion, just cold certainty. Your species will send its best warrior to face me in combat. The rules are simple. No weapons, no technology. Pure skill against skill. If your champion defeats me, Earth will be immediately welcomed into the Galactic Council with all the benefits that entails, including faster-than-light travel technology and trade rights with all member worlds. In the silence that followed, someone in the control room whispered, "And if we lose?" As if hearing the question, Admiral Stone smiled. It wasn't a pleasant sight. If you lose, your world will be surrounded by an isolation field for 100 years. No signals in or out. No space travel beyond your moon. You will be alone until you prove you can be trusted. Director Wilson watched as the room erupted in chaos. Scientists argued with military officials, politicians demanded immediate action, and communication experts tried desperately to trace the signal's origin. You have 7 days to accept or decline our challenge, Admiral Stone continued. If you accept, you will have 3 months to choose and prepare your champion. Choose wisely, Earth. This combat will determine your place in the galaxy. The transmission ended, leaving every screen on Earth showing a simple countdown timer. 7 days, 00 hours, 00 minutes, 00 seconds. In the following hours, every government on Earth scrambled to respond. Emergency meetings were called, military leaders gathered, and the world's best fighters were put on high alert. But in a small gym in Montana, a man named Jack Miller watched the replay of the transmission with quiet intensity. He studied Admiral Stone's movements, the way the alien carried himself, the subtle signs of his fighting style. Jack had spent his life learning to read opponents, and even through a screen, he could see something that others might miss. The alien champion was powerful, yes, perhaps unbeatable by normal standards. But there was one critical flaw in his perfection. He moved like someone who had never faced a truly unpredictable opponent. As the world debated whether to accept the challenge, Jack picked up his old training gloves and began to warm up. He had a feeling he would need to be ready. The clock continued to count down, marking the beginning of humanity's greatest test. The world's greatest fighters gathered in Rome's ancient Colosseum, a fitting place to choose Earth's champion. Over 3,000 candidates had come. Olympic athletes, special forces operators, martial arts masters, and combat sports champions. Each believed they could be humanity's best hope. Jack Miller sat quietly in the waiting area, watching others showcase their impressive skills. He looked ordinary compared to the giants around him. Average height, athletic but not bulky, with graying hair at his temples. A few younger fighters glanced his way and whispered, wondering why this middle-aged man was even here. The selection process was brutal. Each candidate faced multiple opponents using different fighting styles. Security cameras recorded every move, feeding data to supercomputers that analyzed fighting effectiveness. Medical sensors tracked speed, strength, and stamina. But the judges were looking for something more than just physical abilities. When Jack's turn came, he stepped onto the mat facing a towering heavyweight champion. The bigger fighter charged forward with explosive power. Instead of backing away, Jack stepped into the attack, moving in ways that seemed to make no sense, until his opponent crashed to the mat, wondering what had happened. "Interesting," said Dr. Helen Reed, head of the selection committee. "Run that footage again." Fight after fight, Jack didn't just win. He made it look easy. He never used the same move twice. Sometimes he struck like a boxer, other times he flowed like a wrestler. One moment he used precise martial arts, the next he fought like someone from a street brawl. "Look at his eyes," Dr. Reed told her colleagues. "He's not just fighting, he's learning with every match." In the final round, Jack faced Marcus Young, an undefeated MMA champion 20 years his junior. The crowd expected a quick win for Marcus. Instead, they witnessed something extraordinary. Marcus attacked with perfect technique. Jack responded by doing everything wrong, but somehow it worked. He broke every rule of conventional fighting, changing styles mid-movement, combining techniques that shouldn't go together. Marcus couldn't predict what Jack would do because Jack himself didn't know until the moment he did it. After Jack won, Dr. Reed approached him. "You're not the strongest or the fastest," she said, "but you might be exactly what we need. Tell me, how did you learn to fight like that?" Jack smiled slightly. 20 years teaching combat skills to special forces. Every student brought something new. Instead of making them all fight the same way, I learned from them. Mixed everything together. Traditional martial arts, military combat, street fighting. There's no right way to fight. The best technique is the one your opponent doesn't expect. The selection committee spent 3 days reviewing data and footage. Finally, they reached their decision. Dr. Reed made the announcement to the world. "We have chosen our champion. Jack Miller will represent Earth against Admiral Stone." The choice was immediately controversial. News channels showed clips of more impressive-looking fighters. Social media exploded with arguments. How could this ordinary-looking man be humanity's best hope? But in the secured briefing room, Dr. Reed showed the committee one final piece of evidence. They had run combat simulations using the data from all candidates. Against a superior opponent with perfect technique, only Jack's unpredictable style showed any chance of success. "Admiral Stone has fought 1,000 battles," she explained. "He's faced every known fighting style in the galaxy, but he's never faced someone who breaks all the rules. Human beings are chaos engines. We improvise, adapt, create. Jack Miller understands this better than anyone." That evening, as the world debated their choice, Jack sat in his hotel room watching recordings of Admiral Stone's previous fights. Others saw an unbeatable opponent. Jack saw patterns, habits, assumptions. The alien champion was perfect, and that might be his greatest weakness. 3 months of preparation lay ahead. Jack would need every second. The training facility deep in the Rocky Mountains looked more like a research center than a gym. Scientists had transformed it into humanity's best hope for victory, filled with holographic projectors and advanced analysis equipment. Jack Miller stood barefoot on the training mat, watching a life-sized hologram of Admiral Stone demolish yet another opponent. This was his morning routine now, studying every recording the aliens had provided of their champion's previous fights. "He never wastes a move," Jack said to Dr. Reed, who stood nearby taking notes. "Every strike is perfect, too perfect." The hologram showed Admiral Stone executing a flawless combination of moves that ended his opponent in seconds. Jack walked through the hologram, gesturing at specific points in the alien's stance. "See that? He follows the same basic patterns, like a computer program. If A happens, do B. If B happens, do C." For the next phase of training, they brought in fighters from every combat style on Earth. Jack didn't just spar with them. He learned their techniques, then deliberately practiced doing them wrong. When a boxing champion threw a perfect jab, Jack learned to throw it slightly off angle. When a judo master demonstrated a clean throw, Jack practiced making it messy. "You're teaching yourself to be unpredictable," Dr. Reed observed one day, watching Jack combine a wrestler's takedown with a kung fu strike in a way that made their combat eye crash. Jack nodded, wiping sweat from his face. Admiral Stone has spent centuries mastering the right way to fight. But humans, we're masters of finding weird solutions that shouldn't work but do. The training grew more intense. They built special rooms that could change gravity, temperature, and air pressure. Jack learned to fight in conditions that simulated Europa, where the final battle would take place. He practiced in low gravity, high gravity, and even while floating. Some days were brutal. Jack's body, despite being in excellent shape, took a beating. The medical team worked overtime, keeping him healthy, using the latest regeneration technology to speed his recovery. "Your approach is fascinating," said one of the alien observers assigned to monitor Earth's preparation. "Our warriors train to perfect their techniques. You train to be imperfect." Jack smiled as he wrapped his hands for another session. Perfection is predictable. The most dangerous opponent is the one you can't predict. In the final month, they introduced chaos training. Lights would flash randomly. Sounds would blast without warning. The floor might tilt suddenly. Jack learned to adapt instantly, to fight through disruption and confusion. One evening, after a particularly tough session, Dr. Reed found Jack sitting alone, watching the stars through the facility's dome. "Having doubts?" she asked. Jack shook his head. "Just thinking about something my old combat instructor used to say. The more rules your opponent has, the more ways you can break them." He stood up, his movements showing no sign of the day's bruises. "Admiral Stone has spent 300 years learning the perfect way to fight. But there is no perfect way. That's what makes humans different. We know that chaos is part of the game." In the final week, they ran thousands of combat simulations. Jack lost most of them, but he lasted longer each time, and occasionally, when he did something completely unexpected, he won. "Remember," Dr. Reed told him during their final briefing, "you're not just fighting for victory. You're proving that humanity's greatest strength is our ability to adapt, to change, to break the rules when the rules don't work." Jack packed light for the journey to Europa, just his old lucky hand wraps and a small photo of Earth seen from space. He didn't need anything else. His real weapons were invisible: creativity, adaptability, and the wonderful human ability to do things wrong in exactly the right way. As the transport ship prepared for launch, Jack took one last look at Earth shining below. Tomorrow, he would face the galaxy's greatest warrior. But tonight he smiled, knowing he had one advantage Admiral Stone could never match: the power of human improvisation. Europa's surface gleamed like polished glass, transformed by alien technology into a habitable moon. The massive dome of the Galactic arena rose from the icy landscape like a crystal mountain, its transparent walls showing the stars and Jupiter's massive form hanging in the black sky. Jack Miller stepped off the transport ship, his breath steady despite the strange feeling of Europa's artificial gravity. Around him, beings from 100 different worlds moved through the terminal, some floating, others walking on many legs, all turning to stare at the human champion. "Welcome to Europa Station," said a tall, silver-skinned alien guide. "I am First Speaker Bell. Please follow me. The pre-combat meeting begins soon." As they walked through the station's curved hallways, Jack studied everything with quiet intensity. The aliens had built this place to be neutral ground, where warriors from across the galaxy could meet in fair combat. The air smelled clean but strange, and every surface hummed with hidden technology. They entered a vast circular chamber. Representatives from the Galactic Council sat in rising tiers around the edges, their diverse forms creating a living rainbow of colors and shades. In the center stood a single figure that made the room feel suddenly smaller: Admiral Stone. The alien champion was even more impressive in person than in the holograms. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his metallic skin shifting colors like oil on water. His movements were precisely measured, each gesture flowing into the next with machine-like grace. "So," Admiral Stone's voice filled the chamber, "this is Earth's champion." He walked around Jack, studying him with glowing eyes. "I expected someone larger." Jack remained still, but his eyes tracked the Admiral's movement. "Sorry to disappoint you." A murmur ran through the watching aliens. No previous challenger had spoken so casually to the champion. "You understand the rules?" Bell asked, floating between them. "The arena nullifies all technological advantages. No weapons, no armor, no augmentations. Pure skill against skill." Admiral Stone nodded. "I have fought this way 1,000 times." He focused on Jack. "Your species is young. You cannot hope to match 300 years of combat experience." "Young doesn't mean weak," Jack replied. "And experience can be a cage if you let it." The Admiral's metallic face showed no expression, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Something about the human's calmness disturbed him, though he couldn't say why. The medical examination came next. Alien doctors scanned both fighters, ensuring no hidden advantages. They seemed puzzled by Jack's readings. "Your neural patterns are chaotic," one doctor said. "Is this normal for humans?" Jack smiled. "Perfectly normal. We're naturally unpredictable." Later, in his preparation chamber, Jack sat quietly while Dr. Reed gave him a final briefing. The room was simple: a bed, some basic furniture, and a window showing Jupiter's swirling storms. "The arena's gravity will be set to Earth normal," she explained. "Air composition, too. They're being surprisingly fair about the conditions." Jack nodded, wrapping his hands with the same worn hand wraps he'd used for 20 years. "They want a clean victory. No excuses." "Are you worried?" Dr. Reed asked. "He's never lost. Not once in 3 centuries. That's his weakness," Jack said, standing to stretch. "He's forgotten how to lose, how to adapt when things go wrong. Humans, we fail all the time. We learn from it, grow stronger." A soft chime filled the room. 1 hour until combat. Through the window, Jack could see crowds of aliens filing into the arena, their bodies glowing with bioluminescence and artificial lights. Dr. Reed touched his shoulder. "The whole Earth is watching. No pressure." Jack actually laughed. "Good. They'll see something interesting." His eyes held a quiet confidence that made Dr. Reed remember why they had chosen him. In his own chamber across the arena, Admiral Stone ran final system checks on his combat protocols, unaware that he was about to face something his perfect programming had never prepared him for: human chaos. The arena fell silent as Jack Miller stepped onto the combat platform. Above him, Jupiter filled half the sky, its great red spot staring down like a giant eye. The platform itself was a perfect circle, 50 meters across, made of a material that looked like frosted glass, but felt like warm stone under his feet. Across the arena, Admiral Stone entered with mechanical precision. The alien champion's metallic skin had shifted to a deep blue-black that seemed to absorb light. Without his usual technological advantages, he looked less imposing, but still dangerous. "Combat begins in 30 seconds, announced First Speaker Bell from the safety of the observation booth. Remember, the fight continues until submission or incapacitation. There is no time limit. Jack rolled his shoulders, keeping his breathing steady. The arena's air felt thick with tension as thousands of alien spectators watched in complete silence. Somewhere in that crowd, Dr. Reed held Earth's hopes in her trembling hands. Begin. Admiral Stone moved with frightening speed, covering half the distance between them in a heartbeat. His first strike came at Jack's head, a perfect, textbook punch that would have ended most fights instantly. But Jack wasn't there anymore. He dropped and rolled, not in any practiced martial arts way, but like someone tripping over their own feet. The Admiral's strike hit nothing but air. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. The next few minutes were brutal. Admiral Stone unleashed a series of devastating combinations, each one technically flawless. Jack blocked some, dodged others, but many connected. Pain blazed through his body as superhuman strength found its target again and again. "Your technique is primitive," the Admiral said, landing another crushing blow to Jack's ribs. "You cannot win with such crude methods." Jack spat blood and grinned. Who said anything about technique? He stumbled forward, seemingly dazed, then suddenly spun into a move that looked like a drunken combination of 3 different martial arts. It shouldn't have worked, but it caught the Admiral off guard, landing the first solid hit against the alien champion in over 50 years. The crowd's silence turned to confused murmuring. This wasn't how fights were supposed to look. Admiral Stone's attacks became more intense, more precise. He drove Jack back across the platform with a series of strikes that blurred in the air. Jack's defense looked messy, desperate. He mixed boxing blocks with wrestling shoots, threw in random martial arts movements, and sometimes just absorbed hits to stay close. "Why won't you fight properly?" the Admiral demanded, frustration creeping into his voice for the first time in centuries. Jack's response was to launch into a sequence that broke every rule of combat. He combined a failed judo throw with a Wing Chun strike, turned a stumble into a capoeira kick, and somehow made his obvious mistakes work in his favor. Blood ran from cuts above both his eyes. His ribs screamed with each breath. But Jack stayed standing, kept moving, refused to follow any pattern the Admiral could predict. In the observation booth, Dr. Reed watched the medical readouts with growing concern. Jack's body was taking tremendous damage. By any normal measure, he should have already lost. But the readouts showed something else too. Admiral Stone's perfect rhythm was starting to falter. "Impossible," the Admiral said, stepping back to reassess his opponent. "Your form is chaos. Your defense makes no sense. Your attacks defy all combat logic." Jack wiped blood from his face with his wrapped hands. "That's humanity for you. We're really good at not making sense." The first round of battle was ending, and Jack was still standing, something no other challenger had managed in centuries. But staying alive wasn't enough. He had to find a way to win. As Jupiter's light cast long shadows across the arena, Jack prepared for his next move. He'd taken the Admiral's best shots and learned what he needed to know. Now it was time to show the galaxy why humans were so dangerous. The real fight was about to begin. Blood dripped onto the arena floor as Jack Miller squared off against Admiral Stone for what everyone thought would be the final round. The human's face was swollen, his body marked with bruises. In the medical booth, alarms flashed warnings about internal injuries. But Jack was smiling. "Your endurance is remarkable," Admiral Stone said, his metallic skin rippling with patterns of frustration. "But you cannot win. I have calculated every possible combination of known fighting techniques. There is no path to victory for you." Jack's smile widened. "That's your problem right there. You keep looking for known techniques." He suddenly dropped his guard completely, a move so foolish that the Admiral actually hesitated. In that moment of confusion, Jack launched forward with a series of movements that seemed to break every law of physics and common sense. He threw punches from impossible angles, His kicks flowed into grapples that shouldn't work. Each time the Admiral's perfect defense prepared for a logical follow-up, Jack did something completely illogical instead. Observing human patterns, the Admiral muttered, his combat protocols struggling to adapt. Analyzing fighting style. Error. Error. No consistent pattern found. In the observation booth, Dr. Reed grabbed the railing as she watched the medical displays. Look at his brain patterns. He's not planning his moves at all. He's just creating them as he goes. The alien doctors stared in fascination. But that's impossible. Combat must follow logical progressions. There must be a pattern. Down in the arena, Jack had found his rhythm, or rather, his lack of rhythm. He moved like a dancer with an inner ear problem. Yet, somehow each stumble and awkward shift put him exactly where he needed to be. Admiral Stone's perfect strikes began to miss more often. His flawless combinations faltered as he tried to predict an opponent who was deliberately unpredictable. For the first time in 3 centuries, the champion looked uncertain. "This is not fighting," the Admiral shouted, his frustration building. "This is madness." Jack ducked under a punch by apparently tripping, then turned the fall into an attack that caught the Admiral's leg. Madness. This is humanity. We turned falling out of trees into parkour. We made hitting each other into an art form. We took every "you can't do that" and turned it into "watch me." The crowd of alien spectators had gone from confused silence to fascinated murmuring. They were witnessing something unprecedented. Their perfect champion was being forced to adapt, to change his methods mid-fight. Admiral Stone's attacks became more aggressive, more powerful, but also more predictable. He was falling back on his core programming, relying on pure strength and speed when his tactical protocols failed him. That was exactly what Jack had been waiting for. "You know what humans are really good at?" Jack asked, weaving through a barrage of strikes. "Learning from failure. Every time you hit me, I learned something. Every time you knocked me down, I understood more about how you fight." He proved it by seamlessly countering the Admiral's next combination, not with proper technique, but with a bizarre mix of fumbles and recoveries that somehow worked perfectly. The Admiral's glowing eyes widened. "Impossible. Your efficiency is only 37%. Your form is chaos. Your methods defy all combat logic." "Exactly," Jack said, moving into the Admiral's space. "Logic is great, but sometimes you need a little chaos to solve a problem. And humans, we're champions of chaos." The arena hummed with energy as the 2 fighters faced each other in this crucial moment. Jack stood straight despite his injuries, his wrapped hands raised in a guard that broke every rule of proper fighting stance. Admiral Stone's perfect form had begun to show subtle flaws, his certainty cracking under the assault of human unpredictability. The final phase of battle was about to begin, and the galaxy was about to learn why humanity's greatest strength was their ability to throw away the rulebook and write their own story. The final moments of the battle would be remembered across the galaxy for centuries to come. Jack Miller, bloody but unbowed, faced Admiral Stone in the center of the arena. Jupiter's light painted the scene in shades of red and gold, casting long shadows across the combat platform. The Admiral's perfect form had begun to deteriorate. His movements, once flowing like liquid metal, now showed tiny hesitations. Each time he tried to predict Jack's next move, the human did something completely unexpected. "Your body is failing," Admiral Stone said, noting Jack's labored breathing. "Surrender with honor. There is no shame in accepting defeat against a superior opponent." Jack's response was to laugh, a sound that echoed strangely in the arena's perfect acoustics. "Superior? Maybe. But you still don't get it. Humans don't give up just because we can't win. Sometimes we win exactly because we don't give up." He proved it by launching into what looked like a terrible attempt at a spinning kick. The Admiral's combat protocols easily predicted the trajectory, only to be caught completely off guard when Jack turned the failed kick into an entirely different move halfway through. The impact caught the alien champion in a way that his defensive programming never expected. For the first time in 300 years, Admiral Stone stumbled. A gasp went through the crowd. In the observation booth, Dr. Reed gripped her console so hard her knuckles turned white. He's done it. He's broken the pattern. The Admiral recovered quickly, but something had changed. His perfect confidence was gone, replaced by a new emotion he hadn't felt in centuries: uncertainty. "This is not possible," he said, his metallic voice showing stress. "Your moves are inefficient. Your strategy is flawed. You should have fallen hundreds of strikes ago." Jack shifted his weight, ignoring the screaming pain in his ribs. "Want to know a secret? Humans are really bad at doing what we should do. We're too busy doing what everyone says is impossible." He proved it by launching into a series of movements that looked like mistakes, but somehow flowed together. Each time the Admiral's combat computers predicted failure, Jack turned that predicted failure into unexpected success. The alien champion's attacks became more desperate, more powerful, and more predictable. He was fighting against not just Jack now, but against the collapse of everything he believed about combat. That's when Jack saw his chance. As the Admiral launched into his most powerful combination, the same one he'd used to end hundreds of fights before, Jack did the one thing no warrior had ever done. He stepped into the attack, deliberately taking hits to get closer. Calculating response, the Admiral's voice showed strain. "Error, error, no logical counter found." "That's humanity's secret," Jack said through gritted teeth. "Logic isn't everything." What happened next was so fast that even the high-speed cameras barely caught it. Jack took the Admiral's perfect punch as leverage, turned a stumble into momentum, and somehow used his opponent's own perfect technique against him. Admiral Stone, the undefeated champion of the galaxy, found himself flying through the air. He hit the arena floor with a crash that echoed through the stunned silence. For the first time in 300 years, the Admiral didn't get up. The silence held for one heartbeat, then two. Then the arena erupted in chaos as thousands of alien spectators witnessed the impossible become reality. First, Speaker Bell's voice shook as they made the official announcement. "The combat is concluded. Earth's champion is victorious. Humanity has earned its place among the stars." Jack stood in the center of the arena, his wrapped hands raised not in triumph but in respect. Admiral Stone, rising slowly, met his eyes. "In 3 centuries, the alien champion said, I have never encountered such beautiful chaos. Perhaps perfection is not everything." As medical teams rushed to tend to both fighters, Dr. Reed's voice came over the comm, thick with emotion. "You did it, Jack. You showed them what humanity is really capable of." Jack smiled, finally letting himself feel the exhaustion. "No," he said. "We showed them what humanity is capable of. All of us. Our chaos, our creativity, our stubborn refusal to follow the rules." Above them, Earth shone like a blue jewel in the black sky, no longer alone in the vast galaxy. Humanity had proven its worth not through perfection, but through their perfect imperfection. And somewhere in the watching crowd, a young alien warrior began to wonder if perhaps there was more to combat, and to life, than following the rules perfectly.